the Belt and Road, on paper, it's this infrastructure investment project, and it is creating this horrible alternate system that, someday the Chinese Communist Party, you could use it to dominate the world. But
someday.
Well, it's well on the way. But, a lot of the world does need infrastructure development. If China obviously was able to step into a market where there was a big need for it, why did this vacuum exist that the Chinese Communist Party was so able to exploit?
They can produce items cheaper than anyone else in the world. If you're using slave labor, it doesn't take a lot of math to figure out that if you have to pay someone $15, $20 an hour in the United States and it costs $0 an hour there, then it's a whole lot cheaper to produce something, right? So once you have that ability to manufacture at very reduced cost, and you're willing to take a hit, like we were talking about Africa, you're willing to sell phones to everybody in Africa for less than the cost of the phone. Or you probably read in the news this solar panels. So they're producing these solar panels that I guess are very difficult to produce. So doing it in Xinjiang, and they're selling them at less than the cost of making them, so that no other company wants to go into that market. You were saying a vacuum, but the vacuum is created because if China can get everybody out of the marketplace because they can undercut all other competitors, then there's a vacuum. Like they're the only one. They have a monopoly. And so they're trying to create monopolies in certain areas so that the other countries don't get involved in the manufacturing,
which is possible because the Chinese Communist Party doesn't need to be accountable to the Chinese people. Like we just did an episode recently about the dams that have been breaking in China after the recent flooding, and we quoted one official who was saying that most dams in China are old and in desperate need of repairs, but there's just no money to do that. However, there is what's the Belt and Road price tag? $4 trillion?
I mean, that's not real.
That's not real, but
I mean,
it's in the hundreds of billions.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's not like the United States where like every time there's any amount of foreign aid, you get like a bunch of people saying, hey, why are we sending money to a foreign country?
Right. I mean, also, what you were talking about with the undercutting with the phones or the solar panels, they do with infrastructure as well. They will go in and bid on a port in Greece and offer much lower, like they'll offer a higher price. They will do it for less than, or they will bring in and operate it for less than anybody else. Like they will basically make it so that financially they are the only choice.
I mean, when you were in Greece, the port of Piraeus, the whole, they'd taken over half of it by that point. But yeah. But like a Chinese company came in and it was a stand-up company and they were like, we can run this. And Greece gave them a really long lease for it. And they were like, they brought in Chinese workers. And undercut the Greek workers.
Yeah. And but that meant that they could do it much more efficiently, and the government didn't have to pay that much.
Yeah, and they didn't have to deal with safety standards or overtime. It's
or environmental protections.
Yeah.
In a lot of countries, China's gone in and built these power plants and destroyed the rivers, so people can't even use their rivers anymore. The same way it is in China, the rivers are you can't swim in China's rivers, but you can't swim in the rivers in a lot of other places either, because China doesn't have any environmental protections. They say it's up to the country to handle the environment. We're just going to build these with all of the drainage and toxic waste going into the rivers. And this is a problem everywhere, Africa in particular, but Hungary, I just read a report about the rivers in Hungary. It's just as bad there.
It's interesting, the river pollution is one example of an externality, right? It's like a company goes in and they take advantage of some aspect of the natural environment or the society or whatever that they don't pay for. But the true cost of production or development has these externalities, these spillovers into other aspects of the environment or society or politics, etc. So beyond just the river pollution, what are some of the other externalities that we see when Chinese companies come in and into Africa, undercut the local markets, and start to dominate in certain sectors?
I think, well, certainly the air, if we want to stay on the environmental side. But I'll take another one that's kind of interesting in the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So they built this train from Xinjiang down to Gwadar. And in Gwadar, they have because they use all Chinese workers. In Gwadar, they have a Chinese, we'll call it encampment or city. And they created this barbed wire fence around like a chunk of the city where they had built living spaces for the Chinese. So another externality is that going into Africa, I gave the example of Pakistan, that little Chinese cities are being walled off inside another country that the country can no longer use because it's got 10,000 employees from China. And they don't want the Chinese to leave. So the reason why the barbed wire is not to protect the people, it's because the Chinese workers could try to leave, even though they do take their passport. To prevent them from escaping, they wall off the whole area, which makes the people in the country completely annoyed. Can you imagine if in your city they walled off a place for 10,000 people and you weren't allowed to use your parks anymore, or wherever this was located?